Welcome back. President Jacob Zuma is expected to make his much-anticipated first appearance at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry on Monday. The commission has already confirmed that security has been beefed up ahead of the inquiry, and those wishing to attend will have to arrive by 6 a.m. Zuma supporters are also expected to make their way via bus from KwaZulu-Natal. Newsroom Africa's Sipha Kema takes a look at what questions Zuma has to face tomorrow.
The president told him that he was going to eat next door.
Although Faki Mentor forgot certain details in a testimony before the Zondo Commission, the former ANC Member of Parliament is adamant that former President Zuma was present on the night the Gupta brothers offered her a ministerial position.
I immediately went ahead to tell the president what AJ had said to me, which was in relation to the offer, including the issue of the eminent reshuffle.
Zuma's close relationship with the Gupta brothers was thrust in the spotlight once again when the former GCIS boss, Themba Maseko, spilled the beans on this private phone call.
The president proceeded to say the following in isiZulu. Mfoka baba, kuna la madoda kwa Gupta, ngifuna ukuthi uhlane nabo futhi ubancede. And to those who are not very fluent in Zulu, I've translated as follows. My brother, there are these Gupta guys who need to meet you and who need your help. Please do help them.
Many of those who have testified at the commission so far, who have mentioned Zuma, have spoken about how his relationship with the Gupta family appeared unusual.
President Zuma was very much involved in the running of the station, in the sense that there were regular review meetings where a status update was given to him, and he would give feedback to that as well. Also, confidential information, which I, as somebody who set up many stations across in India, would know. There's some confidential information which you don't really give out so early in the project. That was disclosed to the president.
As told by then former Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan, Zuma structured the state-owned entities and the ministries with a hidden agenda in mind.
No, I think in the first instance, the president did. So asking us to look at intervention into the relationship between banks and their clients, for example, pushing the nuclear deal, as was indicated already, allowing for particular types of boards in SOEs to be established, putting in place particular ministers or others who might be cooperative in this venture as well.
Zuma must fall. Zuma. The former president appears unfazed by his pending appearance. On Sunday, he released this video on Twitter. The commission is expecting a large crowd at the inquiry, which has led to the tightening of security. The inquiry is availing only 200 seats to the public and has arranged for an overflow viewing area in the nearby Peter Rus Park. For Newsroom Africa, Channel 405, I'm Sipha Kema in Johannesburg.
All right, we now joined in studio to unpack the much-anticipated Zuma appearance at the State Capture Commission tomorrow. Karen Moon is a regular Newsroom Africa contributor here, and Mpumelelo Mkhabela is a columnist as well as former editor of the Sowetan newspaper. And of course, I'm not alone. I'm joined in studio by Aubrey Masango to help me unpack this. Aubrey?
You raised a very, very important question, and we'll put it to our panel in a few moments' time. The whole question of state capture, what are we talking about? And at a lecture that Zuma gave earlier in the year that was organized by SASCO in KwaZulu-Natal, he actually questioned the very idea of state capture. He gave us a specific understanding of what he understands the state to be and questioned the ability of that very state to be captured. So perhaps let's start with you, Karen. Thanks very much for coming. Sibali, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate
Welcome.
it. The very idea of state capture needs to be, I think, broken into its constituent parts. What is state capture and how is it different from crime? Many of the people that have been implicated have committed crimes or supposed crimes, but how's a crime different from the very idea of state capture?
Well, that's a pivotal question, and it's one that the former president has repeatedly raised, including in an interview with Newsroom Africa. I mean, right at the beginning of this inquiry, his lawyers actually sent letters to the inquiry, essentially saying, we need you to break down exactly what you mean by state capture. It's a term that's bandied about, but what exactly does it mean? For former President Jacob Zuma, it means the whole-scale capture of the entire three arms of government. That, of course, is the executive, Parliament and the judiciary. And he's basically said that while you may have a family accused of interacting inappropriately with certain members of potentially the executive or other people, you can't say there's whole-scale capture of the state. And that's why he's essentially disputing that state capture itself exists. He's also said that he regards the use of the term state capture as a kind of political mechanism that's been used against him and certain people associated with him as a mechanism to discredit and undermine them rather than, you know, kind of political tool. And I think that's what is going to be a big aspect of tomorrow's hearing, is this idea of a politicization. He's used that word, you politicize this. You know, in correspondence from his lawyers to the DCJ. And so what you're asking, what is state capture? Can we say that the state has been captured in South Africa, is going to be one of the issues that he may choose to raise in tomorrow's sitting.
And I'd like Mpumelelo to answer that question, just to get his perspective before we tackle what exactly former President Jacob Zuma will be facing tomorrow.
Well, what you're asking requires a lengthy discussion. In fact, the entire seminar, fortunately, I attended one of them 2 years ago, where we were discussing this issue of what is state capture and has the state in South Africa been captured. Well, the former president has said that, well, the state has got many components. It's got the judiciary, it's got the executive, it's got the legislature, as in parliament. And then he went on to say in one of those rallies that I think, I'm not sure that it's the same one that you mentioned, where he said, look, are you saying that the judiciary has been captured? So he inadvertently actually suggested or admitted that they may have been captured on the part of the executive, but not the other arms of the state. But what he omitted to do, obviously what you are saying is convenient for him, but what he omitted to do is to say, look, South Africa's constitution is structured in such a way that even though these three arms are distinct, but the framework of the constitution is that there's interrelationship, there's intergovernmental relationship. There are some certain rules that, you know, one arm can't function without the other. So what happens in one arm necessarily impacts on the other. So we know, for example, that the way the executive worked under Zuma was such that Parliament was not able to hold it accountable. Because the political process around the ANC was such that the executive basically has its way in Parliament. So you recall how, for example, the Nkandla report was dealt with in Parliament. So Parliament gave the wishes of the executive or succumbed to the wishes of the executive. So once you capture the executive, you almost, given the political dynamics in Parliament, you're almost done with Parliament. So where it got stuck is with regard to the independent state institutions, for example, like the public protector, as well as the judiciary. So, but you can't say because some of these elements were not captured, the state was not captured, because the executive is vital part of the state. In fact, it executes policies. If you disarm the executive or you repurpose it, because that's the purpose of state capture. The purpose of state capture is to repurpose a certain arm of the state or the entire state for purposes that it's not meant to serve.
I think that's, for me, a very critical issue that needs to be understood by ourselves and the nation at large. I asked earlier, when we were having this conversation, what is the difference fundamentally between crime committed in the state versus the idea of state capture? And it appears, based on the way that you've both answered the question, that there's something a little more sinister in the idea or the notion of state capture than just people acting in a corrupt manner, the malfeasance that you would find in a government or in a state. What is state capture? Why is state capture so so important for us to understand, almost even, as some people have suggested, that it is a treasonous act? What is it about state capture that we need to understand versus normal crime in the state?
Well, I think there's, you know, if the allegations are correct, it's essentially about a complicity with the state, with certain members of the state, to enable, you know, outside private interests to almost circumvent the interests of the state in favor of their own business interests. So if we look at a basic allegation, the allegation is essentially former President Jacob Zuma allowed the Gupta family, or influenced by them in terms of certain key appointments. Now, the most glaring, of course, would have obviously been the appointment of former four-day Finance Minister Des Van Rooyen and the removal and Nhlanhla, you know, for whatever reasons, which Zuma will, of course, be asked about why he chose to do that. And then his replacement was someone who was regarded by kind of institutional, you know, financial institutions as someone who was completely not appropriate for that position. Of course, Jacob Zuma holds a very different view on that. And why was he put in place? Why was it, was it a decision made in good faith by the executive? Or was it a decision that was essentially, as many have put forward, people like Pravin Gordhan and Nhlanhla, designed to pave the way for the business interests of that particular family, people aligned to them, and other interests, potentially a nuclear deal, etc., to be put into place? So it's not about what is in the best interest of the state. It's about what is in the interest of a particular group of elites. And that's why there may be an argument made that this is treason, because when you're an executive, the basic constitutional principle you have, mandate you have, is to act in the best interest of the people. And if this is indeed true, then that has not happened.
I wonder then what normal South Africans' perspective is of the inquiry itself and the credibility that it so possesses.
Well, in the beginning, I mean, let's be honest, people doubted whether this inquiry was worth anything in the first place. And the doubt arose as a result of the fact that the person who was going to set it up, who in fact did set it up, was President Zuma himself at that time. And people thought, well, if he is the one who is setting it up, well, are we really going to get anything out of it? What I think people didn't realize is that he was setting it up, but under strict instruction. So the role of the commission was basically predetermined by the former public protector, Thuli Madonsela. She actually put together the terms of reference as in like the broader ones, not the ones that, you know, the detailed one that came up later. And she actually prescribed how the chairperson will be chosen to ensure its independence. Once that was done, it was very clear that the inquiry was going to be independent. I mean, we have no less, you know, a prominent judge in the name of the Deputy Chief Justice. Interesting enough, he too was one of the latest appointments to the bench by Zuma himself. So, and he's seen to be credible. So over time, from the moment when it was announced up to what it has done now, I think the commission has earned credibility because it has shown that it can interrogate witnesses.
But it's still a very politically contentious inquiry, and we can't deny that. I mean, for instance, if one looks at the stance that the EFF has taken towards the inquiry, from initially being part of the litigation that forced former President Jacob Zuma to appoint, or to ask Chief Justice Mogoeng to appoint Deputy Chief Justice Zondo, they've now done an about turn, and we've seen that in terms of, like, for instance, the Tom Moyane not being allowed to cross-examine Pravin Gordhan issue that sort of flared up. We know the EFF was outside the inquiry when Pravin Gordhan was testifying, and that has become a big site of contestation. So it is a very, very politically contested space, and, you know, we, up until now, apart maybe except for Mzwanele Manyi, who sort of made it very clear that he wanted his chance to give his response to evidence that had been laid against him, we haven't seen a scenario where we've really had a hostile witness per se. Jacob Zuma is that hostile witness. He doesn't think very much of the inquiry at all. He said so repeatedly. He said, you're biased. You're turning me into an accused person, you're biased against me, and I don't feel that you have impartiality. And so that's what makes this scenario so interesting, is we're walking into a particular moment in the history of the inquiry where someone who represents the exact opposite of views that says this is credible, this is integrity, is getting into the witness box.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, we've had former and current ministers sort of name-dropping former President Jacob Zuma, but now Feki Mentor was one of the first witnesses to mention Zuma at the commission. Before we discuss some of the things that she said, let's have a look at what she has said at the commission.
Ms. Mentor, I had inquired whether, when you told Mr. Gupta that only the president, in discussion with Luthuli House, can offer ministerial posts, whether he had responded thereto, and if so, what his response was.
He was not perturbed, or he was not, that did not persuade him to abandon his offer. He persisted on it, and we had a bit of exchange, and I became agitated. I began to become agitated, and I got angry and I raised my voice. We were not agreeing on the issue. And just at the point when I declined the offer and I was telling you that you have no authority whatsoever to offer me a ministerial post, the president walked in.
Well, Feki Mentor continued to mention her agitation at the offer, and that then President Jacob Zuma appeared in the Gupta family home to calm her down.
When he walked in, I rose from my seat, much as I was on crutches, out of courtesy, protocol, and respect. And he greeted me whilst he was standing and I was standing. AJ remained seated. And I immediately went ahead to tell the president what AJ had said to me, which was in relation to the offer, including the issue of the eminent reshuffle of Barbara Hogan, as he had informed me about. The president sought to calm me down.
Well, Karen Morn and Mpumelelo Mkhabela are my guests, eminent media practitioners, and we're talking about the issue of state capture, where former President Jacob Zuma will be appearing from tomorrow, which is the 15th, all the way to the 19th. I'm going to ask a question that, maybe let's go to you, Mpumelelo, the question of the very credibility in the minds of South Africans of the state of capture or state capture inquiry. If you look at what it's called Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. It already assumes that there's state capture. If you look at that title, it already says that it's a commission of inquiry into this thing that already exists. And Jacob Zuma is questioning the very existence of it. Just in terms of credibility at a natural justice level, yeah? Can somebody say that the process has been fair to Jacob Zuma if the very idea of state capture has already been assumed to be the case?
Well, if you are in his position, you would understand why he reacts the way he does and why he thinks the commission is unfair. We have to go to the beginning where it started, how it started, and maybe not far back, but just around about the report of the public protector, Thuli Madonsela, where she was investigating certain allegations regarding appointments, allegations that Zuma's son, Duduzane, was involved in some of the transactions in government, and there was a Eskom controversy around Tegeta, and all of those deals at Eskom, and some of them were at Transnet, and there was an issue of allegations of tampering with procedures at SABC for the New Age breakfast. All of those allegations. There were a lot. And the former public protector could not conclude her report, but she did what was basic enough to actually raise a suspicion. And what she found was so overwhelming that she realized that there was no way her office would have the capacity to investigate, given the extent of what she suspected were the involvement of private persons in the running of the state. So she then recommended that there has to be this commission of inquiry. But Zuma's source of grievance arises also around how the public protector tried to get him to answer at that stage of the investigation some of the questions. And yes, we recall very well how he refused to answer the allegations. In fact, even saying that, why are you rushing? Because your term of office is ending. Leave it to the incoming public protector to conclude. And we also know that he also tried to set aside the report of the public protector recommending the inquiry from taking place. And of course, the High Court rejected his attempt. So by the time he signed the proclamation to set the ball rolling for the commission to happen, he was doing so under duress.
Yes.
It was not his voluntary decision to do so. So his reaction now is consistent with that. So we shouldn't be surprised. But the other thing we are raising, Aubrey, I think we have not answered this issue of is it a criminal offense or not? What is clear from the proceedings and from the way the terms of reference were framed is that this will traverse criminal matters, legal matters, political questions, as my colleague says. It's highly politically charged inquiry. So it's inevitable. You can't avoid, given the fact that capture happened in a political environment, but it had legal consequences. And some criminality might have been committed there. That's why the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, has already said, let's not wait for the Commission of Inquiry to end. If there's any suspicion of criminality, let it go to the NPA.
But also, I just want to bring it back to the clip that we played of Veki Mento, just detailing the alleged abuse of power and how former President Jacob Zuma was in fact there in the next room when she met at that Gupta family home. What is it that stands out for you, perhaps, Karen, about the submissions that she made?
Well, I mean, we have to be fair and say that Veki Mentor's evidence did get fundamentally quite severely damaged in a way when she was cross-examined and when they took her into the house. And having seen that video and, her description of the environment and the story about wanting lamb curry and there being vegetarians, and there were a lot of contradictions there. But if what she says is correct, then essentially, to have a private individual offering a member or, potential member of the executive a job on behalf of the president and assuming that role is very, very indicative that something is very wrong. Now, of course, the Guptas have said that this is nonsense, that they never did any such thing. But of course, because they are not willing to come back to South Africa and testify, haven't really been given substantive opportunity to try and cross-examine them, and to try and put a lot of this stuff to these witnesses. I think the more interesting kind of questions that Zuma faces or may face are in regards to the birthday parties that were paid for by Bosasa. We know that, Angelo Agrizzi handed in a letter from Judy Mieni on behalf of the Jacob Zuma Foundation, thanking them for this very lavish birthday party, which he said in an interview with us cost in the region of about 8 million rand. Was that an appropriate thing to do? What are the president's views on this? And also for me, the other issue of the intelligence report that was allegedly used as a basis to remove Pravin Gordhan. I think that's kind of one of the low-flying things that isn't really being discussed. But, the former president himself, we have people like Solimai Mapayile coming forward and saying that was given by the former president as a real basis for his removal, this idea that Pravin Gordhan and Nkobisi Jonas were committing political acts or treasonous acts by, with foreign governments to try and commit economic treason, as it were. I'm using that as a basis to justify the removal and actually saying to the alliance partners, he's lucky he's not being charged with treason. That intelligence report for me, is one of the most fascinating stories out of this whole thing. And it really speaks to this highly contested intelligence space that we find ourselves in. And I would love to hear the former president address whether this is correct, according to him. Where did he get this intelligence report from? And why was he so absolutely convinced that he took it before these alliance partners and literally, on their version, accused Pravin Gordhan of economic treason?
And we'll unpack that further, but now I just want to take a bite by Nhlanhla Nene, who's the former finance minister, completed his testimony at the Zondo Commission in March this year. Now, he told of how a difficult relationship with the SAA chairperson, Dudu Myeni, was one of the factors that led to his axing in 2015.
Would you deal with the response to the chairperson, please?
I quote again from the letter. I said, I understand from your letter that the evaluation for a potential new route for SAA to Khartoum arose as a result of a discussion you had with His Excellency President Zuma. And then I went on to say that the business case evaluating the new route projected that the route would incur losses of approximately 30 million rands in the first 2 years of operation. Notwithstanding the projected losses, you have stated some alternative measures which could make the route financially viable. These include the subsidization of SAA services by the government of Sudan, or SAA undertaking operations on behalf of the government of Sudan as a designated flag carrier. The costs and benefits of these alternatives have not been provided, and implementation, if possible, would require engagement of various stakeholders within both the governments of the Republic of Sudan and South Africa before being considered. As part of the National Treasury's ongoing weekly technical meetings with SAA, continuous feedback is being provided with regard to the progress of the implementation of the network and fleet plan. During these meetings, SAA indicated that the letter received from you is purely for information purposes and is not a PFMA Section 54 application. In the event that SAA decides that it would be favorable to operate the route, a comprehensive PFMA Section 54 application would need to be submitted for my consideration. Consequently, based on the current proposal, I'm not in support of SAA commencing operations to Khartoum. In conclusion, due to the loss-making nature of the proposed operations to Khartoum, I do not approve the commencement of operations on the envisaged route. That's how the letter, and I attached the copy of this response and memo for not approving the proposal as NN7.
And what was the outcome of your refusal to approve the proposal, to the best of your knowledge?
Well, I think this and other similar decisions frustrated Ms. Myeni and the President, and I suspect might have contributed to the decision to remove me.
So we continue to unpack the conversation around state capture, but more importantly and more specifically around the fact that former President Jacob Zuma is going to be testifying as of tomorrow all the way to Friday. And we're trying to get our minds around what exactly we can expect from this particular episode, this particular segment of the Commission of Inquiry, the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. Let me come back to you, Mpumelelo. One of former President Jacob Zuma's mantras is, "Wenze Zuma?" What has Zuma actually done? And I think that that's very, very clever of him. It's very, very cunning of him in the sense that, as you've seen, the various individuals that have testified, Feki Mentor and Nhlanhla Nene, have not necessarily been able to articulate specifically of a wrong that he has done, right? We have to almost piece together the narrative. We've got to connect the dots, as it were. Is the Commission of Inquiry, the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, going to allow us and give us the platform to be able to ultimately understand, for the South African who is looking at this program, who's looking at the whole process, to understand what has Zuma actually done?
Well, look, you have to understand Zuma is a politician, first of all. So by saying or asking the question, "Wenze no Zuma?" putting it like that, Ngesizulu, it's a political strategy to evoke an emotional reaction from whoever is receiving or is hearing him, so that his whole idea of consistently becoming a victim is sustained. So first of all, his main aim is, look, I must be a victim in the minds of the people. And I must ask questions in such a way that I'm seen as such, a victim who has done absolutely no wrong. And I'm just being, facts are being manufactured because these people have always hated me. You remember in one of the other rallies, he said something like he knows that there are big people and big countries that have always wanted him out. And so the victim thing is very consistent. On many of his trials and preparations, his strategy is about that. But the problem is that I think that he has already lost a lot of supporters with that strategy. Because over time, people realize actually he's not a victim. Actually, he became president. How can the entire president be a victim? To be a president in the first instance is to be victorious politically. So how can a person who's victorious politically in that way become a victim? So, but he continues to say, look, I'm a victim.
You know, Busi, one of the questions that was raised by somebody that I was talking to here at Newsroom 405 was, what actually is this commission going to deliver to us? And perhaps it's important for us to have that conversation as to the difference between this commission of inquiry and any other commission of inquiry and a court of law. I think in the minds of many South Africans, the commission of inquiry into state capture has to produce some sort of a result that has a very strong consequence management character to it. What are we to expect from this commission of inquiry, particularly as it pertains to Jacob Zuma?
Well, I mean, I think what we've seen, what was quite interesting and possibly a little bit disturbing was when we saw, for instance, the arms deal inquiry, which found that there was no evidence of corruption in the arms deal, effectively exonerated everyone involved, including obviously the former president, and he used that very strongly as a basis within his permanent stay of prosecution application. Subsequently, of course, challenges to the validity of that inquiry, which President Cyril Ramaphosa chose not to defend or even put up, evidence to say, well, we actually think that this was a legitimate inquiry. And, outside of the realm of facts, that entire incident was quite scary because it indicated the political nature of inquiries, that they need to be able to stand strong in and of themselves if they do face legal review. And they necessarily can't depend, because if we have someone else in office in a few years' time and this inquiry gets challenged, which may very well happen, can we be guaranteed of a defense? And that's why it's so crucial to this inquiry that everything, not just in the realm of the evidence led, but in terms of the procedures followed, are defensible. Now, Jacob Zuma has launched, his lawyers have launched a defense, an attack, as it were, on the procedural aspects of this. And their attack is very much around the fact of, you're not calling him under any of the rules of the inquiry. You said you're not calling him under a rule, number one. Number two, you're not prepared to give him the question, so he's not going to prepare, and that's not fair to him, etc., etc. Inquiry takes a very different stance. They said, we're inviting you. They've clearly had this attitude, we don't want to subpoena people. We know for a fact, for instance, Gavin Watson hasn't been subpoenaed. No one's been subpoenaed as far as we know up until now. So it's this kind of softly TRC approach, come forward, like unburden yourself, etc. And I think that may have its own implications further down the line, and it may be in the best interest of the inquiry to subpoena. But in the Zuma situation, given that he's emphasizing these issues of procedurality and that kind of thing, there are already indications of possible legal challenges further down the line. And for this inquiry to, beyond the realm of what do we expect for Jacob Zuma, what do we expect from this inquiry? It needs to do things by the book, it needs to follow its own procedures, and it needs to be able to, in the ultimate, always have in the back of its own mind, we are very likely to face review. So how do we build up the walls and the fortresses to protect ourselves? Because it's not just him. This is a political boiling point. We may very well see, for instance, the VBS saga forming subject matter of this particular inquiry, given municipal finances involved. And what does it do when other political parties outside the ANC are sucked into it, and those kind of ramifications come into force?
But what is behind that move then by former President Jacob Zuma to actually appear, not even apply to cross-examine any of those who have appeared?
Well, basically what he said in his correspondence, I mean, he didn't name Tom Moyane, but he referred to certain applications by people who had been refused the right to cross-examine. And of course, the most famous of those was the Tom Moyane one, where the inquiry just basically found that on a procedural level, he hadn't justified his application, and they refused it, which of course was, greeted with a lot of unhappiness from certain political quarters. But he's basically said, I think you're biased against me, and why should I apply it to cross-examine if you guys are just going to refuse me because you clearly think I'm an accused person? So the victim issue playing itself out again. But his lawyers also saying, on a procedural level, we haven't got the Rule 5.3 notices. We don't know where we implicated. To be honest, the man has many irons and many fires. He's fighting corruption charges. He's got a 26 million rand cost order against him. So, up until now, this issue of the inquiry and his role in it has been something that I think he's been able to put on the back burner. It's now come to the head, and let's see what happens.
Well, there's a clip that we want to play of Mr. Maseko, who is Themba Maseko, who was directly reporting to him. In fact, there was a phone call from Jacob Zuma himself. And I think that this is very, very important for us to begin to have a sense of the kind of influence that he tried to bring upon some of those staffers in government.
My meeting was at 2 o'clock, if I remember correctly, with Mr. Ajay Gupta. So the call would have been around 1 p.m. or just after 1 p.m. in the afternoon.
Yes, the point is it was during working hours.
It was working hours, yes. When the president came online, we exchanged pleasantries, greetings, etc. And then the president proceeded to say the following in isiZulu. Mfoka baba, kuna la madoda kwaGupta, ngifuna ukuthi uhlane nabo futhi ubancede. And to those who are not very fluent in Zulu, I've translated as follows. My brother, there are these Gupta guys who need to meet you and who need your help. Please do help them. Yes, the next sentence, Jefferson reads as follows. I was not surprised because my job required me to interact with the president, so there was nothing unusual with receiving a call from the president. It is the conversation that I had with him that became a major concern to me, because he essentially said, there are these Gupta boys who need your help. Please go and meet them, and they need your help, and see what you can do to help them.
In that portion of the transcript which you have read, you used the phrase major concern twice. Can I ask you this? Why was it of a major concern that the president would ask you to help the Gupta brothers?
Well, the first major concern I had was I already had a date with Mr. Ajay Gupta. I was going to the meeting. It was too much of a coincidence for me that as I was proceeding to the meeting, I then get a call from the president saying I must go and meet them, and that I must assist them. So it demonstrated to me that what the Guptas, or Ajay Gupta in particular, was trying to do was to demonstrate that he has influence in the highest office of the land. And so as we were just about to meet, I should get a call to actually make sure that I understand what was going on.
We continue our discussion about the appearance of former President Jacob Zuma at the State Capture Commission. And my guests, Karen Moore and Pumela Mkabela, eminent media practitioners and, of course, people that have been following the story very, very, very closely. Bumi, let me quickly ask you this question because we've got so many other clips we want to show. Is the Commission of Inquiry the right instrument to show the culpability of former President Jacob Zuma's, or Jacob Zuma in state capture? Is it the right instrument? I'm asking this question because I know that in the minds of many South Africans, so people have testified. We heard of the former CEO of government business, Themba Maseko, speaking and directly implicating former President Jacob Zuma. The others implicated him and suggested his involvement. But in this particular clip, we see his direct sort of almost command that you will help these individuals, therefore outsourcing his executive powers to the Guptas, for which he's obviously accused. But is this the right instrument to highlight the issue of state capture to South Africans, this commission of inquiry?
Under the circumstances, I don't think we have a better platform than this. This is the best platform. Again, we have to look at how it was set up. So the former public protector recommended that an inquiry of this nature should be set up, and it should have powers that are not less than those of the public protector. And we have to look at what is the role of the public protector in terms of our constitution. It is one of the Chapter 9 institutions whose job it is to safeguard our constitutional democracy and advance it. So it derives its power from the Constitution and also from the Public Protectors Act. So the outcome of this commission should be remedial action that are not less in terms of effectiveness.
Binding.
Yeah, not less than those of the public protector. So it combines the powers of the public protector as well as the powers of a normal presidential commission of inquiry, because you are actually trying to effect the powers of public protector using an instrument of a commission set up by the president. Of course, in this case, it was set up at gunpoint because the president would not have done so voluntarily. So we have to look at, given the issues that are going to be canvassed at this commission, it's a better platform because you also want to come up with something, as you said earlier, there must be consequences. What are these consequences that we're looking at? One, we're looking at issues that might be of criminal nature that should be dealt with by the Hawks and the NPA. Two, you are looking at issues of a political nature. And you'll recall that when Trevor Manuel appeared, the former minister appeared in the commission, at the end, Judge Zondo asked him, given your experience in politics, how do you think we should solve these problems that we've encountered? What would be your solution? To be honest with you, Manuel battled. He just battled to answer the question. So what actually would come out of this commission in the end, I expect, is that there must be a recommendation of how our state should be organized in such a way that what happens in the bureaucracy, like people like Themba Maseko, for example, are being asked to do favors. He's a bureaucrat. What happens in the bureaucracy? What happens at cabinet appointments? What happens in parliament? How this whole system becomes impervious to capture. So I expect that to be a wide-ranging recommendations about organizing the state in such a way that it can't be captured.
And I am going to hold you there because we have to take a quick breather, but we will be back with Bumelelo Mkhabela as well as Karen Morn here on Weekend Prime. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, Karen Morn, my colleague here at Newsroom Africa, sat down with former President Jacob Zuma earlier this year. And now in that interview, he spoke repeatedly of his innocence and even talked about how people who handled his cases have been influenced against him.
There are judges who have said, I had a strategy to delay cases. In other words, according to them, as a citizen of this country, I should not use my rights to satisfy myself about whatever accusation that come. According to them, if there was any accusation, I should just agree. It's a funny thing when the law looks at me. It behaves differently than any other citizens that we have in the country. And therefore, whatever decision that comes here, if it was negative, as you correctly say, it will be the attitude of the judiciary in this country, which is my view, that when they see me, they see somebody wrong. Why? Because NPA has been part of those who have been dating me, saying this man is wrong, and that has been influencing people who handle my matters.
So we continue the conversation. The former president, Karen Moore, as he was being interviewed by you there, continues to plead his innocence. I mean, I think this was the one classic case where he comes up very clearly to say, listen, everybody's against me, and even the institutions of the constitutions have been influenced to be against me. That's probably going to be his line of defense throughout the week, if indeed he does say anything at the Commission of Inquiry tomorrow. First of all, do you think he will actually offer a defense to some of the things that have been said about him, given the fact that you've said that he's almost checked out by not asking to cross-examine those that have implicated him? So first of all, will he actually offer any argument against anything that has been said by him, about him? But he continues to say that he's innocent. Is somebody going to be able to say, no, but you are guilty?
Look, I mean, what's interesting is, of course, when he was interviewed by the public protector, as Mpumelelo has very correctly pointed out, for 4 hours, didn't want to answer questions. And I think a lot of there's been the speculation that we're going to see the same thing. But he's no longer the president. He's a political outsider, and he's got the nation's cameras on him. So what do you think is going to happen? Jacob Zuma will use this opportunity to vocalize a lot of this simmering discontent, which has been coming out more and more and more. And I think he will use this opportunity to vocalize his unhappiness with the inquiry and the process itself. And I think they are aware of that. I think, you know, unfortunately, we have a scenario where there was a very vociferous exchange of letters, which ultimately resulted in him making the surprise move of saying, I will appear. Appear does not equal testify. You know, his lawyers, I expect, understand, are going to address the inquiry tomorrow. They're going to raise certain issues procedurally that they're not happy with. And then they're going to sit down, and the inquiry will be confronted with the former president of this country and, you know, his response to their questions. Jacob Zuma loves playing chess. He's a master strategist, a master politician, whatever you can say about him. He survived 9 years of almost constant legal attacks, votes of no confidence attempts. How many times did we sit through motions of no confidence, guys? Yeah. And he survived all of it. So he cannot be underestimated in any way, shape or form. And I feel like at this point, because Jacob Zuma does not have anything to lose in this scenario. The inquiry, on the other hand, does. And how they manage this process, how they manage him potentially turning around and saying, I believe, as he suggested in some of the letters from his lawyers, that you are controlled by X, Y, Z, that you are compromised by this, you are acting on behalf of these people. How it deals with that kind of open hostility, which I don't think it has ever experienced before, will be groundbreaking and important for its history and what happens to it going forward. Before you go to the clip, I must agree with Karen in her analysis that actually it won't be Zuma on trial here. It will be the Commission of Inquiry itself as to its fairness, its constitutionality, and how it is able to negotiate itself as an institution, if you like, within a very, very volatile political scenario. I'm going to be asking some questions around the aftertaste of Jacob Zuma as a political outsider within the ANC at the moment, but he is still very influential amongst the factions within the ANC, and how that is going to play out as the ANC tries to find itself. Yeah, and unfortunately we are running out of time, but what I want to do is just squeeze in the last submission there, or at least a part of it, of a former ANN editor, Rajesh Sundaram, who appeared before the Zondo Commission. He detailed meetings with President Zuma. He observed that the president was more involved in the business than his son, Duduzane Zuma, even though Duduzane Zuma was a shareholder.
But after I came in here, over a period of a few weeks, I was getting a sense that there is an involvement of the president in this entire project and operations, which was confirmed immediately after the first meeting that we had with the president. I was told at that time, unofficially, that Duduzani Zuma was one of the partners here. I was told there were 3 partners, one being Lakshmi Goyal, the Indian businessman, then the Gupta family, and the third was Duduzani. I was told at that time that each of them owned about 1/3 of the shares in the company, and that these were the 3 entities that owned the news station that I was setting up. Yes. What I found during my experience here was that although Duduzani Zuma was the person who was a director, was a shareholder in the company, it was President Zuma who was more actively involved in terms of the meetings that I had were more like a review by shareholders on the status of the project, on the television project, So the reports that we gave there during those meetings were like shareholder meetings.
All right, before we get just reaction to that very clip, I think let's take a look at what people are saying via social media, on Twitter to be exact. Mkwenazi says, Msholozi be like to hashtag state capture inquiry. Here. Well, that's him laughing there. As Ubaba, or are Ubaba's supporters holding a night vigil outside DISO's offices? Hashtag state capture inquiry. Getting more of your responses on Twitter. A few things to ask Ubaba tomorrow till Friday in order. Why do people readily want to kill for him? Who looked up the word prerogative? Why did ministers fear him? Is he still in touch with the family or friends of the Guptas? What are your questions to Ubaba? I guess that is the critical question there. What will he be asked tomorrow? And Tolo says that I know President Zuma hasn't been twiddling his thumbs over hashtag state capture inquiry. That man has been playing chess, and like the Queen, he's waiting for his chance to strike. His testimony is going to be on his terms. Watch and learn. A lot of people are agreeing with that. Mbui says the former president Jacob Zuma had access to state top secrets, also was a head of intelligence in the ANC. What if he implicates Madiba, Mbeki, Mutlante and the like? So, of course, that is some of your reactions to it. But I want to pick up with you guys in terms of some of the questions that you think should be asked tomorrow. Mpumela?
Look, I mean, before questions are asked of him, I mean, I'm sure he would want to prepare an opening statement because they didn't say to him, come here, we're going to interrogate you. They say, come and assist the commission, we're inviting you. So I think he has a choice, really, in this whole inquiry. The one option is for him to come up in the open and say, look, there were mistakes that were made, and I want to assist this commission to get to the bottom of the truth. I want to assist this country to develop defenses so that in future these things doesn't happen. Here is what I know, and I'm willing to assist this commission all the way. So in that way, there's no interrogation. He offers what he knows. He offers his diary, you know, what has been happening with the meetings. And the other option is the Stalingrad approach that he has been adopting in other legal cases. So where he stalls and stalls, he stalls on procedure, he stalls on substance, he stalls on appeal, he stalls on all of that. So in that case, the commission might become a bit more adversarial on him. So things can get out of hand if they don't manage properly. So if he opts for the former, he can reclaim some of his credibility as somebody who genuinely made mistakes and is trying to help this commission to arrive at a conclusion. But that means that he has to be a state witness in some of the criminal cases. Yes. And some of those people like Bruce Kolwane, for example, they've covered for him. So if he were to speak the truth that actually instructed Bruce Kolwane to do what he did, then it might be complicated when it comes to criminal proceedings. But we should always, I mean, we should not prejudge what he's going to say. Yes. We should keep an open mind to say, look, he does have these two options, to come up in the open and assist the commission or to stop.
We need to stop it there. And obviously
it's
a conversation that's going to be continuing throughout the week. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen. I hand over to you, Mama.
Thank you so much. And in fact, we've got, I'm told, 2 videos of former President Jacob Zuma. Let's take a look.
Zuma must fall, Zuma must fall, Zuma must fall, Zuma must fall, Zuma.
And there's nothing to say after that, right? But I'd like to thank Karen Mourn as well as Mpumelelo Mkabela for coming through and unpacking this story or a preview of what is to come tomorrow. Former President Jacob Zuma is set to appear before the inquiry into state capture. All right, let's take a break now. Thank you so much, Aubrey, as well,
Cheers.
For joining us today. All right, let's take a break. We'll be back after this.